welcome to the Tennis IQ podcast. I'm Josh Berger.
And I'm Brian Lomax. And today, Josh and I are going to discuss a specific quote from a motivational speaker named Jim Rohn. Jim Rohn came into prominence in the entrepreneurship and speaking, motivational speaking world in the 60s. Spoke a lot in the 70s and the 80s, mentored a lot of great people in the personal development world. And the overall topic of the quote is the weight of discipline versus the weight of regret. And, I think, Josh, as we get into 2025, we're recording this episode in kind of the middle of January 2025. This is often a time where people reflect perhaps on the last year, what they accomplished, what went well, what they might want to change, and then gives them an opportunity also to begin to think about the coming year. What are some things they'd like to do? What are some maybe things they'd like to change? And as we both know, with because you hear about this all the time, people want to go to the gym in January, and by I don't know, I think even actually the day where people quit all their resolutions is already passed. I think it's like maybe it's today. Today's that we're recording is January 16th. It's around this time that most people sort of give in.
The yoga studio that I've started going to, they had a special New Year's offer, but you had to pay by January 15th, I think, with them, sort of capitalizing on that and knowing that past, sort of mid-January, people have sort of reached their equilibrium, and maybe, not that motivation has already been fleeting at this point for a lot of people.
And so the date is sort of called infamously now Quitter's Day with respect to that. But that's not what we are doing here on the Tennis IQ podcast, right? We're not quitting in the middle or end of January. We're following through. And so this episode is meant to, I think, help people really want to go big with who they are in 2025. And I'm including us, Josh. We need to hear this message just as much as anybody else. And that was one of the reasons I wanted to talk about it, is to keep me inspired to do some of these things, but also to share it with others as well. Yeah, this particular quote I did share with a women's college tennis team this past weekend, and they're very receptive to it. I did set some context with it, and I will set some context after I read through the quote. It's a bit long, but I think it's certainly worth hearing, and we'll point to different parts of the quote that resonated with us and that we think not only should listeners incorporate into what they do, but also, maybe areas of this that we can personally live and be better in. So here's the quote from Jim Rohn. We all say that we want to succeed, but sooner or later, our level of activity must equal our level of intent. Talking about achievement is one thing. Making it happen is something altogether different. Some people seem to take more joy in talking about success than they do in achieving it. It is as though their ritualistic chant about someday lulls them into a false sense of security, and all the things that they should be doing and could be doing on any given day never seem to get done. The consequences of this self-delusion have their own inevitable price. Sooner or later, the day will arrive when they will look back with regret at all those things they could have done and meant to do, but left undone. That is why we must push ourselves in the present to experience the milder pain of discipline. We will all experience one pain or the other, the pain of discipline or the pain of regret. But the difference is that the pain of discipline weighs only ounces, while the pain of regret weighs tons. So let me just let that sink in with people for a moment. And Josh, when you read this, what were some maybe initial thoughts that came to mind that kind of popped into your head?
I think it's a great quote, and we could put the whole quote in the show notes, by the way. But just so people can read through it themselves, or people can certainly go back 30
rewind.
seconds or 15, 30 seconds and hear that again, or hear it a second or third time, because I think it's really, I think in a certain way can relate to everybody, right? I think everyone has had times or continues to have times where maybe our words or our, what we wish for doesn't isn't exactly aligned with our day-to-day actions, right? And that could be off the court, right? Maybe it has to do with our lifestyle, right? Maybe it has to do with, the way that we eat or the way that we sleep or, work or whatever it may be. And it can certainly have to do with tennis, right? It can certainly have to do with the way that we train and the way that we, prepare our bodies and the way that we, prepare our minds or maybe follow through with certain habits, mentally or physically, in terms of, from a consistency standpoint. So I think it relates to probably everybody to some extent. And I think there are certain parts of the quote that really resonated with me. I think the last line, which I can read, which is, "We will all experience one pain or the other, the pain of discipline or the pain of regret. But the difference is that the pain of discipline weighs only ounces, while the pain of regret weighs tons." And I think that's, it's almost like a quote that somebody can hang on their wall, where it's like, okay, each day, am I willing to be, am I willing to take on that short term pain of the discipline, of the discomfort, of the, maybe me doing something that in the moment maybe I don't necessarily want to do, or, alternatively, am I willing to have that sort of long-term pain of regret? So I think it's yeah, I think of the different parts of the quote, and we can definitely talk about some others, but I think that really stood out to me. And then also the second line here, where it's, talking about achievement is one thing, making it happen is something altogether different. Um, which I think, is something that I think people recognize, that, there's a big difference between, let's say, a goal and a wish, right? A wish is just something that you want to happen. A goal is something that you're really taking steps, you're establishing steps for and then actively working towards. You have a game plan and, following through on it. And I think that, that really relates to this quote, because it's, if you want to achieve something, and especially something big, it takes you, maybe doing things in a little bit of a different way and really following through on it, really being committed, really being disciplined, which, for a lot of people, maybe for everybody, doesn't necessarily come easy, isn't necessarily always the natural thing to do. So it takes us, being willing to have the courage to do things in a different way.
And before we dive a little bit more into maybe the sources of resistance to some of this, to help understand the weight of regret, I want to give people a written exercise that they could do, a thought provoking exercise. And I'm not exactly sure the source of this. I know Brian Johnson, the author of Arete and the Heroic platform, uses this, but I think he also got it from another source. But the title of the exercise is A Trip to Hell. And so the scenario is, imagine yourself on your deathbed. Maybe you're at home, maybe you're in a hospital, and you know that you did not live your ideal life. And maybe part of that's even your tennis career. You could have pushed things, you wanted to be better, but you didn't, for whatever reason, couldn't overcome the resistance to that. Couldn't overcome the resistance to being the best you could be in all aspects of life. And at that moment, in walks into the room the most idealized, optimal version of yourself, the person you could have become. So you're there, you're on your deathbed, so there's no time to change the story. How does that feel to know that this is who you could have been, but didn't do it? What's that moment of regret feel like? And then after you ponder that, does that get you to think a little bit differently about the time you have left here? And I think, when I did this, Josh, it definitely was thought-provoking for me. I'm 57 now, And, as I told you earlier, I told this to the college tennis team I met with on over the weekend. There are more years behind me than there are in front of me. And that's fairly sobering thought. But at the same time, I don't feel like I'm done contributing something, whether that's to a community like this, to family, friends, clients, whatever it is. I feel like there's a lot more in me. And I have to start, or can always do better with matching intentions with actions. And I think, this quote and something else from a guy named John Finkel, he writes a really cool newsletter called Books and Biceps. It's sort of like getting athletes and jocks to read, and it's very enjoyable. So in his newsletters, you get book advice, but you also get like workout advice. It's a very interesting combo. And he wrote a post at the end of 2024 sharing some of his thoughts from the year. And one of the things that he says, it was like his first sort of musing, was force yourself to do big things. Because for many of us, our default state is kind of like chill, laziness. And that sounds bad. I don't want to be calling people lazy, but we all fight those forces of fear and laziness. Those are the primary sources of resistance. You used the word courage earlier, Josh. That's how we address fear. But how many of us have not done something because maybe we're not as willing to put ourselves on the line? Maybe we're a little bit afraid of what others might think of what we're doing or who we might become. Or, on the discipline piece is hard. It can be pretty easy, to sit down and watch 8 hours of football on a Sunday or binge a TV show. And there's nothing wrong with like little, watching some games or whatever. But if that's like your normal Sunday, that because potentially getting in the way of doing things, right? So I think if the more that we all kind of consider this idea of regret and how powerful it is, and at the end of our life we can't change it, because if every one of us took stock right now, we might have some regrets, and you might be able to say, okay, cool, I understand that. Power of regret, I'm going to change that. I've definitely had moments like that in life. The story continues. But when you're on your deathbed, the story does not continue. You may have minutes left. What are you going to do? Nothing. Except realize that, you have to deal with the pain and the weight of what you did not do. People famously talk about how, people who are in their 80s or later in life, that their regrets are never about what they did. Maybe not never, but the majority of their regrets tend to be on what they did not do. And I think that that's the kind of thing that we're all trying to minimize here, you and me included. And obviously we can put this into a tennis context. Many people want to take their game to the next level. What's stopping you? What's stopping you from committing to that? What's stopping you from hiring a coach or a fitness trainer or a mental performance coach or whatever it is? What's stopping you from going to the gym a little bit more or entering a couple of tournaments? Consider what that is. Probably some combination of fear and laziness or just default state of chill. Can you address some of that? And it's not like you have to do it forever. You could just say, all right, 2025, that's the year. This is who I want to be. And then, I think once we start doing that, Josh, then we can kind of help people build systems around that. Accountability for it. Because you can get all fired up right now. But, in a couple of weeks, where's that fire? How do you maintain that fire? So any thoughts on the trip to hell exercise or anything else that I said there?
I really like it. And, I think that, I think that it's something that probably is important for people to think about, right? Okay, when I am on my deathbed, what do I want to be able to say, right? Do I want to have, I don't want to have these regrets for myself, and I think there's different ways that we can sort of be proactive in order to, in order to address that. There was last year, in the beginning of last year, I did a workshop, which was led by somebody named Ali Abdal, who has a huge YouTube channel, came out with a book about a year ago as well. And he said, okay, everyone, I want everyone to open ChatGPT. And I want you to tell it to write an obituary, and you can put your name in and say, okay, have a add some details about, your professional life, your personal life, but really write out what when all is said and done, what do you want what do you want to I guess what do you want your legacy to be in a certain way, but what do you want that obituary to be able to say? This person prioritized family. This person, achieved this and this professionally. This person was known for this. People around Josh said this about him. And again, I think it has sort of a similar impact to what you're talking about with with that deathbed uh, sort of analogy, where it causes you to sort of zoom out and see the big picture a little bit more instead of getting so stuck in the weeds of our day-to-day life. It causes us to be able to take a step back and say, okay, well, everybody's years are limited here. And what do I want to be able to not just achieve, but how do I want to live day to day? When all is said and done, what do I want to be able to say for this journey up to this point? And I think what that can do is it can cause us to live a lot more intentionally rather than just letting life happen, rather than us just sort of going through the motions day by day and putting out, whatever, dealing with whatever might be going on that particular day or that particular week. It causes us to really maybe take more of a long-term approach, really trying to achieve bigger things long term, really trying to, maybe treat people in our lives in a different way. Maybe, really trying to, um, yeah, I think live life with more intention rather than just, sort of going through the motions moment by moment. It causes us to, I think, yeah, really take a step back and no. So I think it's a definitely a helpful exercise. It also reminds me of something called a negative visualization, which comes from the world of sort of mindfulness and meditation, and not to be confused with some of the visualization that we talk about from more of a performance standpoint.
Yeah, and
Um,
Stoicism as well, right? The Stoics were
and
big on
Stoicism, exactly.
negative
Yep,
visualization.
yep, which I think came, yeah, where it came from first. And what we do in a negative visualization, and if you're welcome to expand on this as well, is we think about, okay, imagine if, let's say, people around us passed away, or imagine if we didn't have imagine if we weren't healthy. Imagine if we didn't have some of the capabilities that we have today. From a tennis standpoint, imagine if we couldn't play tennis, for whatever reason. We lived in a place where there was no tennis courts, or we couldn't physically do it, or we didn't have the financial means to do it, or whatever the reason. Imagine if you couldn't, you know, imagine if you were on your deathbed, or you were sick, or people around you had passed away, or you were, you weren't healthy enough to do what you wanted to do. Imagine if things had gone wrong in different ways, and really try to put yourself in that moment, and then take a step back and recognize, okay, I'm not in this situation. I can feel gratitude about, you know, being able to do what I want to do, about having my health, about having the people around me. And let's maybe live life now in a different way, and be appreciative for all of those things around me. So I think it's again, I know we're talking a lot about sort of death and things like that today, but I think it is important that those things do come up at times. But I think that doing an exercise like that can be really helpful too, where we can really imagine imagine a world where maybe we don't have some of these things, and then step back into the world where, into reality where we do have them, but maybe not take them for granted in that same way as we tend to.
And also, perhaps, let's say that those things came true, Josh. How would we cope with
Hmm.
that? So I think when we did an episode on mental contrasting, really very similar to negative visualization, and we presented the WHOOP framework from Gabriel Oettingen. WHOOP being for wish, outcome, obstacle, plan. Really figuring out, okay, what could go wrong? What's my plan around this? That's another version of that. So we've covered actually, whether we meant to do this or not. We've done like 3 thought-provoking exercises here, right? A trip to hell, the obituary/eulogy exercise, and then some negative visualization. I want to do one more, Josh. That's maybe a little happier. Okay.
Nice.
This right, so that we don't get stuck in this morbid place, but hopefully is provoking people to think a bit more about going bigger in 2025. So the name of this exercise, it's a companion exercise to the trip to hell. It's called the trip to heaven. So let's say you had a time machine and you could fast forward into the future and meet your ideal, optimal self. You did it. You lived your best, most fulfilling life. And you get to spend 10 minutes with this person. First of all, how would it feel to know you did it? Secondly, what advice do you think your optimal self would share with current day you? And any thoughts around that? So that's a pretty cool exercise as well. And it's getting us more focused on, okay, maybe you feel proud. Hey, I did it. Fewer regrets now. What do I think my optimal self would share with me in terms of how he or she got there? How did they do that? And then obviously it becomes your job to get to work and do those things. A little bit similar to the eulogy or obituary exercise. Like if you want people to call you virtuous, well, get to work
Hmm.
and start doing those things. So, again, January being a great time for reflection. I hope people can take some time to think about these exercises, maybe write some thoughts down on them, and then begin to channel that into, all right, what do I want to do in 2025? Or maybe it could be shorter, Josh. What do I want to do in the next 3 to 4 months that I think would make a really big difference to me? And if we think about something like tennis, what's really important? Your energy. Is there something that you could possibly do to improve some of your energy management skills, whether that be sleep routine, how you eat, how you work out, meditation, naps, relaxation, working out your schedule so that you're maximally energized at certain times? That could be that simple. But it could also be looking at your game and say, you know what, I want to take one of my strengths to the next level in the next 3 months and see what kind of impact that has on my game. As we've talked about, it's easier actually to improve a strength than it is a weakness. Because there are more neural connections around that strength. You tend to enjoy your strengths more. So you're going to learn faster, you're going to improve more. And it would also probably be a bigger impact on your game. Maybe that's something you commit to. But I would love for listeners to think about something, whether it's more energy, sort of generic energy kind of thing, or very specific to the work of tennis that they could commit to. Now, this is the hard part, though, Josh, right? Is the intention and the action piece. If it isn't that important to you, it probably won't get done. So you've got to really think about, is it important for me to do this? Do I really want either to be that kind of person or to really work on this one little thing? And and if it is, then you can start to generate the energy. You can start to overcome maybe the fear and laziness and resistance to going for that piece. So I'm going to stop there, get your thoughts on that, and then maybe we can also get into how do we keep ourselves accountable in that process.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a tennis standpoint, you know, and rather than, again, I know we've mentioned the word laziness. I think rather than contentness, rather than being content with
We're
where our game
satisfied,
is,
yeah, right.
yeah, satisfied, complacent, um, can we strive for something more, right? Can we strive for something more, and not just maybe in a sort of in a vague cliche way, but can we really, choose something that we want to uh, really take to the next level, right? Maybe it's our mental game, right? We obviously talk a lot about that. Maybe it's our fitness. Maybe it's, I know for a lot of adults, myself included to an extent, it can be there's periods of time where I am competing more, significantly more, and then periods of time where I compete significantly less, right? It's a different from when I was in high school or college and I had, sort of matches and competitive opportunities built in where, as an adult in, let's say, USTA leagues, USTA tournaments, other, UTR tournaments, things like that, it's on you to sign up and follow through and play them and train for them. It's, you don't necessarily have that same structure built in. So, maybe it's that you want to compete more and play in, in big tournaments and put those events on your calendar and work towards them. But I think, yeah, instead of that complacency, um, you know, choosing something to really work towards. And again, I think if we can take us, I think being able to understand why this is important to us, understand why we want to do this, why is this meaningful? What would it look like? How would it feel to get there? Right? Sort of like that, trip to heaven exercise, right? How exciting would that be if we could really maximize our potential? If we really could be the best player we could be, well, how would that feel? How satisfying would that be? I think it's sort of that self-actualization piece of, hey, I did what I needed to do to get here, right? This didn't just happen by accident. I really worked hard to get here, and boy, am I proud. So I think it's, if we can put in that time in advance and sort of think some of these things through, think about how it would feel to get there, think about what we need to do to get there, pick an aspect of our tennis game, our tennis journey that we want to focus on that's gonna, that can really be the key to helping us get to that next level. Then I think if we can do that planning ahead of time, then it becomes a lot easier to follow through.
Yeah, I'm glad you hit on the topic of contentment, satisfaction. Maybe that's a form of resistance as well. Maybe laziness is sort of a close cousin to that. And one of the messages I had given to the women's team that I worked with over the weekend was, because I wanted to set some context around this whole message that I don't think you guys are lazy. I'm not saying you don't work hard. But if you all look at yourselves as if, yeah, we're doing fine, we're like an 8 out of 10, then of course satisfaction and contentment are going to settle in. Now, I'm not calling you a 2 out of 10, but I think you need to look at yourself as if you are a 2 out of 10. And it doesn't mean you're a bad person. It doesn't mean you're not working hard. It means there is so much more in you that you don't even know about. But it's going to take some real urgency to go out and get it and be that player. Because this is a team that's, it's a Power Four conference team. They're good, but they're not great. But they could be great. And it's all within them to do that. And they took the message, I think, the right way. They didn't take it as Brian's telling us we don't work hard. Brian's telling us that we're disappointing. Now, I wanted it to come across in like that. No, Brian believes we can be more, and um, and that's what I want everybody else to feel as well. Is that yeah, you might be in a great place, but guess what? There's more. There's like infinite potential in there. It's really up to you to decide how much you want to push that. And again, the same goes for us. We have to, I think, in some ways, Josh, we could easily say, oh, yeah, we're doing fine, feel like an 8 out of 10. But then that's just going to lead to kind of complacency, not changing a lot, not pushing some things. But there's probably so much more that each one of us could be doing, for the people around us, for our clients, for tennis community in general, ourselves. And so why not have the courage to go do that? And I think the next piece of it is right, how do you keep momentum going for something like that? And one of the things that I have found to be most impactful the last couple of years is journaling. Really journaling each morning about setting some intentions for who I want to be today, what I need to do, and then reflecting on how the day went and trying to make some course corrections around that. And the more that I do that, the more the system seems to work. And I've really doubled down on that this year. I've actually paired that journaling exercise, Josh, with Ryan Holiday's daily Stoic journal and reflecting on the daily questions there. Mm-hmm. And again, that's just getting me to think a little bit more, a little bit differently about who I want to be, what I can control, what sort of controls me. So just getting me to be just much more thoughtful in the morning and the evening. It just helps me be that person I really want to be and not fall into default mode so much. But there's, of course, discipline about getting up and doing that and doing it before you go to bed. Is it hard? It's not that hard, right? But if we look at the trip to hell exercise, that's going to feel way worse than, I spent 10 minutes each morning and 10 minutes each evening writing stuff, So yep. I don't know if you have any other thoughts maybe on that part or what you try to do to be more accountable for achieving what it is you want to do or who you want to be.
It's a good question. And I think that, there's an app that I've used, and quite frankly, there's been times where I've used it more often and times where I've fallen off and used it a little bit less often. And but there's an app that I've used called Way of Life that people can look up, which I believe is a free app, but maybe if you there might be some paid features. But essentially you can put in certain habits. So maybe journaling in the morning is one of those habits, and journaling in the evening is another habit. And maybe meditation is a habit that you want to add. Maybe reading is a habit, whatever it is for you. Maybe there's, personal fitness things. Maybe there's things, maybe for tennis players, maybe you want to visualize, practice, visualization. Maybe there's other sorts of habits. So you add them and you can set a reminder on this app, and you could, additionally put it on your calendar or set another sort of reminder to, again, help hold you accountable. But you can, you can keep track. Okay, I have these 5 things on my habit tracker today. How many of those 5 did I do? And maybe I did 0, maybe I did 3, maybe I did 5. And it feels awesome when you can do all 5. And then you can keep track over time. And I think, to me, the biggest thing is actually just making sure I get on that app each day and spend that 30 seconds saying yes or no. But I think what something like that does is it really does help with that accountability piece. And it's again, it's not having another person there to hold us accountable. It's us doing it for ourselves. But I think it's a tool that can really help with that, because if we're just, if we want to journal twice a day, right? It's, for most people, we can't just go from 0 to 100 and just start with that, right? It's, I think for a lot of people, you have to build up to that point. So having a tool like this to sort of remind you of what you want to be doing, and then, sort of helping you measure whether you're doing it or not can be helpful because, there's different research around habits. Some people throw out that 3 week, or 21 days that it takes to build a habit. I don't know exactly,
Yeah, I think that's been somewhat debunked. It's more like
exactly,
28
exactly.
to 300, depending on the habit.
I think it varies. That's my understanding. So it's not necessarily the 3 weeks, but it takes time. For anybody, it takes time. So I think, yeah, having a plan to get to that point where, like brushing your teeth or like, other sorts of daily habits that you don't even have to think about it. You can get to that point where it becomes automatic. And I think if that's the main goal, to get to more automaticity, then during that pain, I guess we can say, to get there, that sort of discomfort that it takes to get there, that discipline that the quote talked about that it takes to get there, that we have some support, that we have some accountability. And you could have partner accountability where you could have another person who's helping hold you accountable, and you can maybe help hold them accountable. But I think that there's different resources like an app like Way of Life, or there's written habit trackers. I know James Clear with Atomic Habits, he has that, a physical written one that people can use. But I think, yeah, if we're trying to set ourselves up for success, by taking that extra step to put it on an app or by, writing it down, it makes it more likely that we're going to follow through on it.
Exactly. We're designing systems to keep ourselves accountable, to also remind us of what we want to be doing and who we want to be. I think
Yep.
I'm gonna throw out a challenge, Josh, to the listeners on one habit to adopt for the next 3 months. And by all means, use a habit tracker like Way of Life or something else, or even put it on a to-do list where you get reminders of it. And this habit is, for every practice session and match, that you write down 1, 2, 3 learning goals for today. And then do your best to reflect on those. And then let's see what that feels like after 3 months. The habit tracker will help remind you, but it will also help show you, maybe, let's say you played 5 times this week. How many of the 5 times did you actually do the learning goals
Yep.
or the focus goals? I think if people can stick to that kind of habit for the next 90 to 120 days, they will feel so much better about how much they have learned about their tennis game. They will be much more mindful of what's going on the court, more intentional, more deliberate. And I would be shocked if their games did not improve in some way by doing that.
Can you give some examples of those
Yeah,
learning goals?
good question, or good thought. So and I would love to hear your thoughts on that too, Josh, because it kind of really runs the gamut. It could be more from, all right, today I really want to work on hitting my inside out forehand high and heavy. I got a tournament coming up, so that's a focus goal. These are actually goals that I worked on with a player last week. He has a big tournament this coming weekend. And then the other one was that during points in practice, he was to practice his between points routine, especially knowing when to use a green light routine and when to go yellow, walk to a different part of the court for the yellow zone. So I really wanted him to be focusing on, what am I focused on and what are my emotions now, so that he knows where he's going, and to get good at that before the tournament. So those would be examples of, and the idea was to use that all week, but he was going to write it down every day.
Yep.
Other things might come up, of course, right? But it's really about, what aspects do I want to really concentrate on or improve? And they could run from, strokes, overheads, volleys, to the mental game, to footwork. A lot of different things, but it's got to be something that you can control and really put your focus into, It can't be, I just want to focus on my forehand today. That's a bit vague.
Hmm.
Bring more specificity to that. And of course, if people want some advice on some of those goals or feedback, they can always email us at tennisiqpodcast@gmail.com.
No, I think that's great. I think that's great advice. Think of it more in terms of process goals, which are, I think definitely in line with what you're talking about. And I think whether it's for a match or for a tournament or for a practice, which I think a lot of players may be more inclined to do that for matches. But I think if we take that same sort of intention and focus for practice, that's so much more beneficial. But yeah, having certain goals, and I think of it, when people are coming up with them, and people can come up with them on their own, or I can, I come up with them. I come up, I work with people to come up with them as well, especially in the beginning. But yeah, I sort of think of it through two filters, right? Is this something completely within your control? So it's not something like, oh, I want to hit 10 aces in the match, right? Okay, well, what if, there are
Yeah, if
things
you're
out
playing
of your
Novak
control.
Djokovic, it's not happening.
Exactly. Exactly. Your opponent has something to do with that. But yeah, making sure that it's things completely within your control. Like maybe it's about your routine, or maybe it's about how you warm up, or how maybe it's about that you want to do some breathing exercises or meditation and visualization before you play for a certain amount of time. Right. So making sure it's completely within your control, and making sure that by doing that, it directly leads to, the types of outcomes and results that you want, which is, to play better, to have a better chance of winning, things like that. So I think by doing that, and I think we can, set those learning goals or those process goals um, before a practice, before a match. But I think we can also even think about them long term. We can think about them in the course of a year, or even, past a year, right? We talked about some big picture things today in terms of maybe thinking about, the rest of our lives. Can we have certain goals for that? And that's not just outcome and result based, what we want to accomplish and achieve, but more process based, more day to day, more thinking about, okay, well, how do I want to go about things? How do I want to go about my life? And how do I want to go about my tennis journey? And can we bring intention to that? I think is really key in order to achieve, in order to achieve what we want to achieve, but also in order to, really get the most out of our abilities and out of the time that we have.
So I hope listeners have found this episode valuable, perhaps inspiring. Would love to have a bunch of people jump on board with our challenge of writing these process learning goals for every day that you play for the next, whether that's practice or competition, for the next 90 to 120 days. And then maybe, we check in and share feedback on that sometime end of April, beginning of May, see how that has gone for people. So that is our show for today. Thank you all for listening. For more on today's episode, please check out the show notes. If you have any feedback or questions for the two of us, please email us at tennisiqpodcast@gmail.com. Also, if you're enjoying the content that Josh and I discuss on the show, please rate and review the podcast so other tennis enthusiasts can find it more easily. Additionally, to be notified of new episodes, please subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice, including YouTube, and you can also check us out on Instagram. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon in our next episode.